The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for the first time in 300 years. Representatives from 47 species filled the massive chamber on Nexus Prime, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electronic pulses that the universal translator worked overtime to convert into understandable speech. High Chancellor Vextar of the Zolonian Empire raised his crystalline appendage, calling for silence. The chamber fell quiet, save for the nervous rustling of the insectoid Krethak delegation and the low humming of the energy-based luminals. Fellow counselors, Vextar began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. We face an unprecedented crisis. The darkness swarm has broken through our outer defense lines. 3 entire star systems have gone silent in the past rotation cycle. A collective shudder rippled through the assembly. The darkness swarm was every spacefaring civilization's nightmare, a hive-minded species of mechanical organic hybrids that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty husks of planets behind. They had appeared from the void between galaxies, seemingly immune to conventional weapons and diplomatic contact. Admiral Corvex of the Draknari hegemony, his reptilian features scarred from countless battles, slammed his fist on the podium. Our combined fleets have thrown everything at them. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, even our experimental quantum disruptors. They adapt to every weapon we deploy within hours. The mathematical probability of victory decreases with each engagement, added Dr. Quintal, the lead scientist from the silicon-based Nexery Collective. Her synthesized voice carried no emotion, but the data she presented was terrifying. Current projections indicate total galactic conquest within 2 standard years if their advancement rate remains constant. Murmurs of despair filled the chamber. The peaceful healer caste of the empathic Valans began emanating waves of sorrow that affected the emotions of nearby species. Even the notoriously optimistic Trade Federation representatives looked defeated. There must be something we haven't tried, insisted Ambassador Yilneth of the Aquatic Depths Alliance, her gill slits fluttering with agitation. Some weapon, some strategy, some alliance we haven't considered. Actually, came a small voice from the back of the chamber. There is one option we haven't discussed. All attention turned to a modest figure in the observer section, Ambassador Chun-Li of the Human Confederation. Humans were one of the newest members of the Galactic Council, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Most species still considered them primitive compared to civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia. High Chancellor Vextar's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. Ambassador Chun, while we appreciate human enthusiasm, your people have only recently joined our community. The Darkness Swarm presents challenges that our most ancient and powerful civilizations cannot overcome. Chun-Li stood slowly, her small frame dwarfed by the massive alien representatives around her. With respect, Chancellor, that's exactly why you might want to consider our perspective. Sometimes the oldest solutions come from the newest members. What could humans possibly offer that we haven't already tried? Scoffed Admiral Corvex. Your military technology is centuries behind ours. Your largest warships are smaller than our patrol craft. You're right, Chun-Li acknowledged with a slight smile. Our ships are smaller. Our weapons are less advanced. Our technology is primitive by galactic standards. But there's one thing you should know about humans before you dismiss us entirely. She activated her portable holographic display, showing images that made several species recoil in horror. Battlefields covered with mud and blood, soldiers charging through artillery fire, ships sailing into massive storms, humans climbing impossible mountains, exploring deadly caves, and voluntarily jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft. We've been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. Chun-Li continued, her voice gaining strength. Not just fighting, we've been fighting each other. For resources, for territory, for ideas, for honor, sometimes just for the sake of fighting. We've developed strategies and tactics born from desperation, innovation forged in the heat of battle, and warrior traditions that stretch back to when we fought with sharpened sticks and stones. The chamber fell silent. The concept of intraspecies warfare was almost incomprehensible to most galactic civilizations. They had achieved space travel through cooperation and peaceful development. The idea that a species could advance while constantly fighting itself was alien to them. But, more than that, Chun-Li pressed on. We've learned to fight enemies that seem impossible to defeat. We've faced overwhelming odds, impossible situations, and enemies that appeared unstoppable. And, somehow, we've found ways to win. Dr. Quintal's mechanical voice cut through the silence. Human military history indicates a disturbing pattern of violence, but their survival and advancement despite constant warfare is mathematically improbable, yet historically documented. Exactly, Chun-Li said. You want to know what humans can offer that you can't? We can offer soldiers who were born in battle, raised in conflict, and trained by 10,000 years of warfare. We can offer warriors who don't just fight to win. They fight because fighting is what they do. Admiral Corvex leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. You speak of warriors, but the darkness swarm has destroyed fleets of our finest soldiers. What makes human warriors different? Chun-Li's smile turned cold. Admiral, your finest soldiers are professionals. Trained, disciplined, and highly skilled. But they became soldiers. Humans? We were born soldiers. We've been killing things that want to kill us since we lived in caves. Every advancement we've made, every tool we've created, every step toward the stars has been driven by our need to fight something. She gestured to the holographic display again, showing human cities built on the sites of ancient battlefields, monuments to wars fought with increasingly sophisticated weapons. Your species developed space travel to explore and expand. We developed it to make sure we could fight anywhere in the universe. The empathic Valan's emotional emanations shifted from despair to something approaching hope mixed with fear. The concept of a species that had weaponized its own expansion was both terrifying and fascinating. But the darkness swarm adapts to everything, protested Ambassador Yilneth. They've already proven immune to our most advanced weapons. That's because you're fighting them with advanced weapons, Chun-Li replied. You're using sophisticated technology against an enemy that consumes and adapts to sophisticated technology. You're playing their game by their rules. She brought up new images, human soldiers in primitive gear, fighters using improvised weapons, warriors adapting to impossible conditions with nothing but ingenuity and determination. Humans learned long ago that the most advanced weapon isn't always the most effective weapon. Sometimes you need to think like your enemy thinks you won't think. Sometimes you need to use tools so simple, so basic, so fundamentally stupid that nobody would expect them to work. High Chancellor Vextar's crystalline form pulsed with deeper colors, indicating intense consideration. You suggest that human tactical doctrine might succeed where our technology has failed. I suggest that human tactical doctrine doesn't rely on technology, Chun-Li corrected. It relies on humans. And humans, Chancellor, are the most adaptable, most persistent, most unreasonably stubborn species you'll ever encounter. We don't just fight until we win. We fight until the enemy stops existing. The chamber buzzed with translation systems working overtime as species debated in their native languages. The concept was radical. To rely on primitive tactics against an advanced enemy seemed counterintuitive to civilizations that had solved most problems through technological advancement. The Draknari hegemony has never been defeated in open battle, Admiral Corvex said slowly. But the darkness swarm destroyed 3 of our battle groups in less than an hour. If human methods could succeed where our proven tactics failed, then you'd be willing to consider our proposal? Chun-Li asked. What proposal? Demanded High Chancellor Vextar. Chun-Li straightened, and, for a moment, something ancient and predatory flickered in her eyes. Give us a fleet. Not your best ships. We can't operate them anyway. Give us ships we can understand, weapons we can modify, and freedom to fight this war the way humans fight wars. And in return? In return, Chancellor, we'll show you what happens when you ask the galaxy's apex predators to solve a problem. She paused, her smile turning genuinely frightening. You wanted soldiers. We'll give you warriors who think war is the most natural thing in the universe. The vote was closer than anyone expected. 47 species, facing extinction, gambling their future on the untested theories of their newest and most violent members. In the end, desperation won by a single vote. As the council session ended and species began filing out to prepare for humanity's entry into the war, Chun-Li remained seated, staring at the holographic display that now showed the expanding darkness consuming star systems at the galaxy's edge. Admiral Corvex approached her, his heavy footsteps echoing in the emptying chamber. "Ambassador, I hope you understand the magnitude of what you've promised. The survival of 47 civilizations now rests on human military capabilities." Chun-Li looked up at him, and the Admiral was surprised to see not fear or uncertainty in her eyes, but anticipation. "Admiral, you don't understand what you've just done. You've just given humanity permission to wage war without restraint against an enemy that threatens our new home. You've just told the most warlike species in the galaxy that everything we love is in danger, and you've asked us to fix it." She stood and began walking toward the exit. The Darkness Swarm thinks they're the galaxy's apex predator. They're about to learn why humans climbed to the top of the food chain on a planet that was actively trying to kill us for millions of years. As she reached the doorway, she turned back one last time. "Oh, and Admiral, when we're done with this war, the galaxy is going to understand why humans are the only species that turned their word for warrior into a compliment." The human delegation left Nexus Prime that day with authorization codes for a mixed fleet of older vessels from various species, permission to modify weapons and tactics as needed, and complete operational freedom in their sector of the war. What they didn't take was any guarantee they would succeed. What they did take was something that no other species could offer: the absolute certainty that they would find a way to win, or they would die trying. For humans, those were the only two acceptable outcomes in any war. Behind them, the Galactic Council began the process of evacuating non-essential personnel from the Outer Rim worlds. They were preparing for the possibility that humanity's confidence was misplaced, that their primitive tactics would fail, and that the Darkness Swarm would continue its inexorable advance toward the galaxy's core. They were also preparing for the possibility that they had just unleashed something equally dangerous in the opposite direction. Within 72 hours, the first human battle group would engage the Darkness Swarm. The galaxy would discover whether humanity's reputation for impossible victories was justified, or whether they had simply been lucky enough to survive their own violent tendencies until someone stronger came along. Either way, the war was about to change in ways that no one, not even the humans themselves, could fully anticipate. The human fleet that assembled at Staging Point Omega was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where other species maintained pristine formations of identical vessels, the human battle group looked like a collection of spare parts held together by stubbornness and improvisation. Admiral Sarah McReynolds stood on the bridge of her flagship, the repurposed Draknari heavy cruiser, now designated UES Indomitable, watching her motley collection of ships through the tactical display. Zolonian fast attack craft flew alongside modified human cargo haulers. Prethak defensive platforms had been stripped down and converted into mobile weapons platforms. The entire fleet looked like it had been assembled in a junkyard by creative teenagers. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Commander Jackson Torres from the communications station, "we're receiving final deployment orders from Galactic Command. We have operational freedom within the Kepler sector, with standing orders to halt swarm advancement by any means necessary." McReynolds nodded, her weathered features reflecting decades of military service. She had fought in 3 border conflicts, commanded peacekeeping operations in 7-star systems, and earned her reputation as one of humanity's most innovative tactical minds. Now she faced an enemy that had crushed civilizations with millions of years of military experience. "What's our asset inventory, Torres?" 73 vessels of various classes, Admiral. Most are retrofitted civilian ships with human crews. We've got about 12,000 personnel total, including Marines, engineers, and support staff. Ammunition is creative, ma'am. That was putting it diplomatically. Human weapons technology was primitive by galactic standards, but human engineers had spent the past week retrofitting alien weapons systems with distinctly human modifications. Plasma cannons had been jury-rigged with proximity sensors salvaged from mining equipment. Energy shields had been bypassed to redirect power to kinetic weapons that most species considered obsolete. "Engineering report?" McReynolds called out. Chief Engineer Maria Santos looked up from her jury-rigged control station, wiping grease from her hands. We've got weapons that shouldn't work, engines held together with spare parts and prayer, and enough improvised explosives to crack a moon. In other words, ma'am, we're ready for business. The bridge crew chuckled, but Mac Reynolds could see the tension beneath their humor. They all knew the odds. The Darkness Swarm had destroyed everything the galaxy's most powerful militaries could throw at them. Humanity was about to test whether primitive cunning could succeed where advanced technology had failed. Admiral, interrupted Ensign Park from the sensor station, we're detecting swarm activity at the edge of the Kepler system. Multiple contacts, moving in standard consumption formation. Mac Reynolds studied the tactical display as red dots appeared at the system's edge. The swarm moved with mechanical precision, their biomechanical ships advancing in perfect mathematical formations that had proven impossible to break. Number and classification? Approximately 200 contacts, ma'am. Mix of harvesters, hunters, and command vessels based on galactic identification protocols. 200 swarm vessels against 73 human ships. The mathematics were clear, and they weren't favorable. But Mac Reynolds smiled anyway, because mathematics had never stopped humans from trying impossible things. All ships, this is Admiral Mac Reynolds, she announced on the fleet-wide channel. I know what you're thinking. The odds suck, the enemy is bigger than us, and we're flying into a fight that everyone expects us to lose. She paused, watching her ships maintain formation despite the approaching threat. But here's the thing about humans. We've been fighting impossible odds since we figured out how to make pointy sticks. We've never been the biggest, strongest, or smartest species on our planet. But we're still here because we learned one simple truth. The enemy only wins if you let them. On screens throughout the fleet, human faces looked back at her, young and old, experienced veterans and fresh recruits, all sharing the same stubborn determination that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. The galaxy asked for soldiers, Mac Reynolds continued. They're about to learn that humans don't become soldiers. We're born soldiers, raised soldiers, and we die as soldiers. Today, we're going to show the swarm what that means. She turned to her tactical officer. Commander Hayes, signal all ships. Execute Battle Plan Thermopylae. Battle Plan Thermopylae was distinctly human in its approach. Where galactic military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and technological superiority, the human plan relied on deception, improvisation, and the willingness to take risks that no sane military would consider. The human fleet split into 3 groups, each taking a seemingly random course toward the swarm formation. To outside observers, it looked like humanity had panicked and scattered. The swarm, analyzing the human response through their collective intelligence, categorized the human tactics as disorganized and ineffective. They were wrong. Group Alpha, led by Captain Jennifer Walsh in the converted freighter UES Persistence, approached the swarm's left flank at maximum engine power. The ship had been modified with every piece of mining equipment the engineers could salvage, drilling lasers, demolition charges, and industrial cutting tools that had no business being used as weapons. Swarm hunters moving to intercept, reported Walsh's tactical officer. They're adapting their formation to contain us. Perfect, Walsh replied. That's exactly what we want them to do. All ships, execute maneuver Charlie 7. The human ships suddenly reversed course, accelerating away from the swarm pursuers at maximum velocity. It looked like a retreat, and the swarm vessels increased speed to pursue, their adaptive algorithms calculating the optimal intercept courses. Meanwhile, Group Beta had taken position near Kepler-4's asteroid belt. Captain Robert Kim, commanding the UES Defiance, watched his sensors as swarm harvesters moved to surround his position. Sir, we're completely surrounded, reported his navigation officer. Excellent, Kim replied. Now they can't miss us, and, more importantly, we can't miss them. He activated the fleet channel. All ships, commence Operation Asteroid Storm. The human ships had spent the previous week seeding the asteroid belt with improvised mines, not sophisticated military explosives, but simple chemical charges attached to asteroids and programmed to detonate when swarm vessels came within range. It was crude, primitive, and exactly the kind of tactic that advanced civilizations had abandoned millennia ago. The swarm's adaptive algorithms had no protocols for dealing with weaponized space rocks. The first explosions caught 3 swarm harvesters completely by surprise. Asteroids detonated in sequence, creating a cascade of debris and explosive force that shredded the organic mechanical hull plating that had proven immune to energy weapons. Direct hits on multiple targets, reported Kim's tactical officer. Swarm vessels are taking significant damage from kinetic impact and debris. But the real surprise was Group Gamma. Admiral Mac Reynolds had taken the smallest and most nimble human vessels directly toward the swarm's command formation. Her ships were outnumbered 10-1, facing the swarm's most powerful units, and flying directly into what any reasonable tactical analysis would consider a suicide mission. Admiral, swarm command vessels are powering adaptive shielding, reported Commander Hayes. They're preparing to neutralize our weapons before we get within effective range. Let them, Mac Reynolds replied. Prepare the Jackson Maneuver. The Jackson Maneuver was named after a human military officer who had lived 3,000 years ago and had never seen space combat. But he had understood something about warfare that the galaxy's advanced civilizations had forgotten. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one nobody expects you to use. All ships, jettison external fuel tanks on my mark, Mac Reynolds ordered. And, remember, we're not trying to destroy them with the explosion. We're trying to blind them. The human ships released their external fuel supplies directly toward the swarm formation. The swarm's adaptive systems immediately began analyzing the chemical composition of the fuel, calculating optimal defensive responses, and preparing to neutralize what they assumed was a primitive chemical weapon. Instead, the fuel ignited in a brilliant flash that temporarily overwhelmed the swarm's sensor arrays. For exactly 14 seconds, the most advanced hive intelligence in the galaxy was effectively blind. 14 seconds was all the humans needed. The UES Indomitable and her escort ships passed through the sensor dead zone at maximum velocity. Their simple kinetic weapons and improvised explosives targeting the swarm command vessels at point-blank range. The swarm's adaptive armor, designed to absorb and counter energy weapons, had no defense against humans willing to ram explosive-laden shuttles directly into their hulls. Direct hit on swarm command vessel, reported Hayes. Their coordination matrix is destabilizing. Without their command structure, the swarm formation began to fragment. Individual vessels continued fighting according to their programming, but the collective intelligence that made them so effective started to break down. Captain Walsh's Group Alpha reversed course again, catching the pursuing swarm hunters in a crossfire with improvised weapons that the enemy had no algorithms to counter. Plasma cutters designed for salvage operations sliced through hull plating that had deflected military-grade energy cannons. Captain Kim's Group Beta emerged from the asteroid field with swarm harvesters attached to their hulls like mechanical parasites. Instead of trying to shake them off, the human crews opened their airlocks and fought the boarding units in hand-to-hand combat using improvised weapons and centuries of experience in close-quarters fighting. Admiral, Torres called out, we're receiving reports from all battle groups. Swarm forces are taking heavy casualties and falling back toward the system edge. Mac Reynolds watched the tactical display as red dots began disappearing or retreating. The impossible had happened. Humanity had won its first engagement against the galaxy's greatest threat. But she wasn't celebrating yet. Signal all ships to maintain pursuit, she ordered. We're not letting them regroup and adapt to our tactics. Torres, send a message to Galactic Command. What should I tell them, Admiral? Mac Reynolds looked at the retreating swarm forces, then at her battered but victorious fleet. Human ships were damaged, several had taken casualties, and they were operating far beyond their design capabilities. But they were winning. Tell them that humanity has engaged the darkness swarm in the Kepler sector. Enemy forces are in retreat. Human casualties are acceptable. Mission status. She paused, considering her words carefully. Mission status is that the galaxy's apex predators just learned they're not alone at the top of the food chain. As her fleet regrouped and prepared to pursue the retreating swarm forces, Mac Reynolds reflected on what they had accomplished. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had thrown their best technology at the darkness swarm and failed. Humanity had succeeded by ignoring technology entirely and relying on the one advantage they possessed that no other species could match. They were willing to fight dirty, think creatively, and use weapons that no civilized military would consider deploying. Most importantly, they were willing to take risks that other species would consider suicidal, because humans had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to win was to bet everything on a single desperate gamble. The swarm would adapt to human tactics eventually. Their collective intelligence would analyze the battle, develop countermeasures, and return with improved strategies. But that would take time, and time was exactly what the galaxy needed. More importantly, humanity had proven that the darkness swarm could be defeated, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple application of human stubbornness applied to an enemy that had never encountered anything quite like them. The war was far from over. But, for the first time since the swarm had appeared, the galaxy had reason to hope. The emergency council session was very different from the first one. Where despair had dominated the previous gathering, now confusion and cautious hope filled the chamber on Nexus Prime. The impossible had happened. The darkness swarm had been defeated in open combat. High Chancellor Vextar stood before the assembled representatives, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated deep contemplation mixed with disbelief. The initial reports seemed too extraordinary to accept. 3 separate verification teams have confirmed the data. Human forces not only engaged the darkness swarm successfully, but achieved a decisive tactical victory. The chamber buzzed with dozens of species communicating in their native languages. Admiral Corvex of the Draknari hegemony leaned forward, his scarred reptilian features displaying obvious skepticism. With respect, Chancellor, our own military analysts are struggling to understand how primitive human tactics succeeded where our most advanced strategies failed. The battle reports read like fiction. Dr. Quintal of the Nexari Collective activated her holographic display, showing the tactical breakdown of the Kepler engagement. Mathematical analysis indicates that human victory probability should have been 0.003%. Yet they achieved complete tactical success with minimal losses. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Yilneth of the Aquatic Depths Alliance, we should hear directly from the humans themselves. On cue, Admiral Mac Reynolds entered the chamber alongside Ambassador Chun-Li. The human admiral still bore the marks of recent combat. Her uniform was patched in several places, and her left arm was in a support brace from injuries sustained when her flagship took damage. Admiral Mac Reynolds, Chancellor Vextar began. The Galactic Council requests your assessment of human tactical capabilities against the darkness swarm threat. Mac Reynolds looked around the chamber at the assembled alien representatives. She had fought 3 engagements against the swarm in the past month, and each battle had taught her something new about both her enemy and her allies. Chancellor, the first thing you need to understand is that we're fighting this war backwards, she said bluntly. Every species in this chamber approaches warfare as a technological problem. You develop better weapons, stronger shields, faster ships. The swarm beats you because they adapt to technology faster than you can develop it. She activated her portable display, showing footage from the recent battles. Humans approach warfare as a human problem. We don't try to out-technology the enemy. We try to outthink them, out-stubborn them, and out-crazy them. The footage showed human ships using tactics that made several species recoil in horror. Vessels ramming enemy formations at suicidal speeds. Crews fighting boarding actions with improvised weapons. Ships deliberately exploding to deny the enemy intelligence gathering opportunities. But, Admiral, interrupted Dr. Quintal, these tactics appear to have extremely high casualty rates among your own forces. Acceptable losses, Mac Reynolds replied simply. Humans have always understood that some things are worth dying for. The swarm doesn't understand sacrifice because they don't value individual lives. That's their weakness. Admiral Corvex studied the tactical displays with professional interest. Your methods are undeniably effective, but they seem to rely on actions that most civilized species would consider inadvisable. Mac Reynolds smiled, and several species found the expression unsettling. Admiral, Humans have been doing inadvisable things for our entire history. We sailed across unknown oceans in wooden boats. We climbed mountains that killed most people who tried. We voluntarily launched ourselves into space in metal tubes powered by controlled explosions. She gestured to the display showing human ships in formation. Every one of these vessels is operated by people whose ancestors survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, pandemics, and predators by being too stubborn to give up and too crazy to recognize impossible odds. The psychological profiles are fascinating, added Ambassador Chun-Li. But there's something else the Council should understand about human military doctrine. She brought up new displays showing human training facilities, war colleges, and military academies. We don't just train soldiers. We train soldiers to train other soldiers. Human military knowledge evolves constantly because we've been fighting for so long that adaptation is instinctive. What do you mean? Asked Chancellor Vextar. We mean, Mac Reynolds said, that the tactics we used at Kepler won't work again. The swarm will adapt to those methods within weeks. But humans will have developed new tactics by then, because adaptation is what we do. She pulled up combat footage from the most recent engagement. 3 days ago, we encountered a swarm force that had adapted to our kinetic weapons and improvised explosives. So we changed tactics entirely. The footage showed human vessels deploying clouds of metallic chaff that interfered with swarm sensors, while small teams of humans in environmental suits attacked enemy ships directly using portable cutting tools and shaped charges. You sent humans into space to fight hand-to-hand combat with mechanical entities? Admiral Corvex asked, his voice rising in disbelief. We sent humans to do what humans do best, Mac Reynolds corrected. Solve problems through direct application of violence and stubbornness. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. While other species had been developing increasingly sophisticated weapons to fight the swarm, humans were essentially reverting to their most primitive instincts and winning. There is another matter, Ambassador Chun-Li said quietly. Human forces have been taking prisoners. The reaction was immediate and intense. Multiple species began communicating frantically in their native languages. The concept of taking swarm entities prisoner had never been considered possible. Impossible, Dr. Quintal stated flatly. Swarm entities are hive-minded. They cannot be separated from the collective consciousness without ceasing to function. Actually, they can, Mac Reynolds replied. It just requires very specific conditions. She brought up new footage that made several species physically recoil. Human soldiers were shown extracting damaged swarm units from destroyed vessels, using improvised tools to separate the organic components from the mechanical ones. When you damage the mechanical control systems, but leave the organic components intact, you get something interesting, she explained. The organic parts retain basic intelligence and memory, but lose connection to the hive mind. What do they tell you? Asked Chancellor Vextar. Everything, Chun-Li replied. Swarm navigation routes, adaptive algorithms, target priorities, and, most importantly, their point of origin. The chamber erupted in noise as species debated the implications. If humans had discovered the swarm's origin point, it changed everything about the war. Mac Reynolds waited for quiet, then continued. The darkness swarm isn't from this galaxy. They're refugees from a galactic war in Andromeda. They're running from something that destroyed their original home. Running from what? Admiral Corvex demanded. Another human civilization. The silence was absolute. The concept that humans existed in other galaxies was shocking enough. The idea that humans were so warlike that they had driven the darkness swarm to flee their galaxy was almost incomprehensible. The Andromedans developed differently than we did, Chun-Li explained. Instead of fighting each other for millions of years, they achieved unity early and turned their attention outward. They became a unified human empire dedicated to the simple principle that humans should be the dominant species in the universe. And the swarm, Chancellor Vextar asked, was created by non-human species in Andromeda as a last-ditch effort to fight human expansion, Mac Reynolds replied. The swarm was designed to be everything humans weren't, unified, adaptive, and technologically superior. It worked, briefly. What happened? Mac Reynolds' smile turned predatory. What always happens when someone threatens humanity? The Andromedans adapted faster than their enemies expected. They developed tactics specifically designed to fight adaptive hive minds. Eventually, they won. But the swarm escaped to our galaxy, Dr. Quintal observed. Yes, and they've been trying to gather resources and forces for a return trip to Andromeda. Every world they consume, every ship they capture, every bit of technology they acquire. It's all preparation for round 2 against the humans who drove them out. The implications were staggering. The galactic civilizations hadn't just been fighting for survival against the darkness swarm. They had been caught in the middle of a war between 2 human civilizations that spanned multiple galaxies. What do you propose? Chancellor Vextar asked. Mac Reynolds and Chun-Li exchanged glances. We propose that this galaxy's human forces take primary responsibility for the anti-swarm campaign. We understand the enemy better than anyone else because we understand the people who created them. But, more than that, Chun-Li added, we propose that the galactic civilizations prepare for the possibility that the Andromedans might follow the swarm here. Are they hostile to non-human species? Asked Ambassador Yilneth. Unknown, Mac Reynolds admitted. But they're humans who have spent thousands of years believing that the universe belongs to them. They might not be thrilled to discover that their local cousins have been sharing it peacefully with 46 other species. The council session continued for hours as species debated the new information and its implications. But the fundamental decision had already been made. Humanity would lead the war against the darkness swarm, not because they were the most advanced or most powerful, but because they were the only species that truly understood what they were fighting. As the session concluded, Admiral Corvex approached Mac Reynolds. Admiral, I have commanded Draknari forces for 2 centuries. I have never seen tactical innovation like what your people demonstrate. How do you maintain such adaptability? Mac Reynolds considered the question seriously. Admiral, every other species in this galaxy achieved peace and cooperation relatively early in their development. You learn to solve problems through technology, diplomacy, and collective effort. Those are valuable skills. She paused, watching the alien representatives file out of the chamber. But humans never achieved peace. We've been fighting something, each other, our environment, the universe itself, for our entire history. We developed adaptability because the alternative was extinction. And now we're going to teach the darkness swarm the same lesson we've taught everything else that tried to kill us. Mac Reynolds replied. We're going to show them that humans don't just survive impossible odds. We turn impossible odds into someone else's problem. As the human delegation left Nexus Prime, they carried with them expanded authorization for the anti-swarm campaign and a new understanding of their role in galactic affairs. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were the galaxy's defense against threats that other species couldn't comprehend or counter. Behind them, the Galactic Council began preparations for a war that had become far more complicated than simple survival. They were preparing for the possibility that 2 human civilizations might soon be fighting over their galaxy, and that their peaceful coexistence might be threatened by the very species they had asked to save them. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The galaxy had asked for soldiers, and humanity had provided warriors who were more effective than anyone imagined. But warriors, by their very nature, were dangerous to everyone around them, including the people they were supposed to protect. 6 months after the first human victory, the war had evolved into something that no galactic civilization had ever witnessed. Traditional battle lines had dissolved into a complex web of raids, ambushes, and running battles that stretched across 17 star systems. Admiral Mac Reynolds stood in the command center of Firebase Echo, a hastily constructed human military installation built into the hollow core of a metallic asteroid. The base existed in constant motion, never remaining in the same location for more than 72 hours to avoid swarm detection. Admiral, we've got incoming transmission from Strike Group Delta, reported Commander Torres, now wearing the insignia of a captain after 3 battlefield promotions. Captain Park reports successful completion of Operation Broken Arrow. Mac Reynolds nodded, studying the tactical hologram that showed the current positions of human forces throughout the war zone. Broken Arrow had been one of her most audacious plans yet, using captured swarm vessels to infiltrate and destroy a major swarm production facility. Casualties: 30% of Strike Group Delta ma'am. But the swarm manufacturing complex is completely destroyed. Intelligence estimates it will set back their ship production by at least 6 months. 30% casualties would have been catastrophic losses for any other galactic military. For humans, it was the cost of doing business in a war against an enemy that adapted to conventional tactics within hours. Signal Captain Park that he's done good work, Mac Reynolds said, and prepare Operation Prometheus for execution. It's time to take this war to the next level. Operation Prometheus was the culmination of months of human tactical evolution. Instead of simply fighting the swarm, humanity was preparing to turn their own adaptive abilities against them. The plan was ambitious, dangerous, and completely insane by galactic standards. It was perfect. Ma'am, called out Lieutenant Singh from the intelligence station, we're receiving priority communication from the Galactic Council. Ambassador Chun-Li is requesting immediate conference with senior military command. The holographic image of Ambassador Chun-Li appeared in the center of the command chamber. Even through the distortion of long-range transmission, her expression was grave. Admiral, we have a problem. Chun-Li began without preamble. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures at the galactic edge. Something big is coming through from Andromeda. Mac Reynolds felt her stomach tighten. How big? Initial estimates suggest a fleet of at least 10,000 vessels, Admiral. And they're using faster-than-light technology that's several generations ahead of anything the local swarm has deployed. The implications were staggering. The Andromedans, the human civilization that had driven the darkness swarm from their home galaxy, were coming to finish the job. Timeline? Mac Reynolds asked. 6 weeks, possibly less. Admiral, there's something else. The Galactic Council is concerned about human intentions. Meaning? Chun-Li's expression grew even more serious. Meaning that several species are questioning whether local humanity can be trusted to defend galactic interests if the Andromedans offer to include us in their empire. Mac Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, considering the political implications alongside the military ones. The galactic species had learned to rely on human military capabilities, but they had never fully trusted human motivations. Now they were facing the possibility that humanity might choose to side with their own species against their galactic allies. What's the Council's official position? Officially, they're requesting that human forces continue anti-swarm operations while preparing defenses against potential Andromedan incursion. Unofficially, Chun-Li paused. Unofficially, several species are developing contingency plans in case humanity switches sides. And what do you think we should do? Chun-Li smiled, and it was an expression that would have made the darkness swarm nervous. I think we should remind the galaxy why they asked for our help in the first place. I think we should show them what happens when humans decide to protect something they care about. Mac Reynolds understood. The galaxy had become humanity's new home, and humans had a long history of fighting to protect their homes. But, more than that, they had 46 allied species who had trusted them with their survival. All right, Mac Reynolds decided. Signal all human forces. We're accelerating the campaign timeline. I want the darkness swarm eliminated as a military threat before the Andromedans arrive. Admiral, that's impossible, protested Captain Torres. Even with our current success rate, complete elimination would take at least 2 years. Then, we'll do it in 6 weeks, Mac Reynolds replied simply. Because that's how long we have. She turned to the assembled staff officers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to attempt something that has never been done in galactic history. We're going to eliminate an interstellar threat through pure application of human stubbornness and tactical innovation. Over the following week, human forces throughout the war zone received new orders that seemed to confirm every alien stereotype about human recklessness. Instead of the careful, methodical campaign they had been waging, humanity was about to attempt the complete destruction of the darkness swarm through simultaneous massive assaults on every major swarm position. The plan required perfect timing, absolute coordination, and a level of risk acceptance that made previous human tactics look conservative. It also required something that no other galactic species possessed, the willingness to bet everything on a single desperate gamble. Operation Prometheus began at 0800 Galactic Standard Time on a Tuesday, for no better reason than Mac Reynolds thought Tuesdays were unlucky for humanity's enemies. Across 17 star systems, human forces launched coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm swarm adaptive capabilities through sheer tactical chaos. Instead of using predictable military strategies, each human commander was given broad operational freedom and encouraged to improvise based on local conditions. In the Rigel system, Captain Washington led a force of converted mining ships in a direct assault on swarm positions using industrial equipment as improvised weapons. Asteroid miners with shaped charges attacked swarm vessels at point-blank range, while construction crews welded crude armor plating to civilian transports. In the Vega sector, Captain O'Brien's forces used psychological warfare tactics adapted from ancient human conflicts. They broadcast human music, literature, and art on all frequencies while attacking, creating sensory chaos that interfered with swarm coordination algorithms. Near Alpha Centauri, Captain Nakamura's fleet employed the most audacious tactic of all. They allowed themselves to be captured by swarm vessels, then activated pre-planted explosive charges that destroyed the enemy ships from within. The swarm's collective intelligence, designed to adapt to consistent military strategies, struggled to process the sheer variety of human tactical approaches. Every time their algorithms developed countermeasures for one attack method, humans would switch to completely different tactics. But the real innovation was Operation Prometheus itself. Admiral Mac Reynolds had realized that the swarm's greatest strength, their adaptive collective intelligence, could be turned into their greatest weakness with the right approach. Instead of trying to defeat adaptation, humanity would overload it. All forces commence final phase. Mac Reynolds broadcast to the entire human fleet. Execute Protocol Pandora. Protocol Pandora was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Every human ship would simultaneously attempt different tactics against swarm forces, creating a tactical chaos that would force the swarm collective to process thousands of different adaptation scenarios simultaneously. Human vessels began operations that ranged from the innovative to the insane. Ships rammed enemy formations while playing classical music. Crews fought boarding actions using weapons improvised from kitchen utensils and maintenance tools. Entire squadrons deployed clouds of metallic confetti that jammed swarm sensors, while human pilots flew through the chaos using manual navigation. The swarm collective intelligence, faced with tactical diversity that exceeded its processing capabilities, began to experience the equivalent of a neural overload. Individual swarm units started operating independently, their connection to the hive mind fragmenting under the strain of processing too many adaptation scenarios at once. "Admiral," called out Captain Torres from the tactical station. "Swarm coordination is breaking down across all sectors. They're losing collective cohesion." Mac Reynolds watched the tactical display as red dots representing swarm forces began moving erratically, their perfect formations dissolving into chaos. "Signal all forces to press the attack. Don't give them time to recover." What followed was less a battle than a systematized destruction of an enemy that had become too confused to fight effectively. Swarm vessels, operating without central coordination, fell back on basic programming that made them predictable targets for human forces that specialized in exploiting predictable enemies. Within 18 hours, the Darkness Swarm had ceased to exist as an organized military threat. Scattered individual units remained throughout the galaxy, but their collective intelligence had been so thoroughly damaged that they could no longer coordinate large-scale operations. "Admiral," reported Captain Torres, "we're receiving surrender signals from isolated swarm units throughout the war zone. They're requesting asylum." Mac Reynolds blinked. The concept of swarm units requesting asylum was so unprecedented that she had no protocols for dealing with it. "Surrender signals?" "Yes, ma'am. Apparently, when cut off from the collective, individual swarm units retain personal consciousness, and they're terrified of the Andromedans." The irony was perfect. The Darkness Swarm, created to fight humans, was now seeking protection from humans against other humans. "Signal the Galactic Council," Mac Reynolds ordered. "Inform them that the Darkness Swarm is no longer a military threat. Human forces are prepared to begin preparation for Andromedan arrival. And the swarm units requesting asylum." Mac Reynolds considered the question. The galaxy had asked humanity to solve the swarm problem. They hadn't specified how. "Granted," she decided. Any swarm unit that formally surrenders will be granted protection under galactic refugee protocols. Maybe it's time this galaxy learned that humans fight to protect people, not to destroy them. As news of the swarm's defeat spread throughout the galaxy, the reaction was mixed. Joy at survival was tempered by nervousness about what humanity might do next. The galactic species had seen human military capabilities firsthand, and they knew that the same forces that had saved them could just as easily threaten them. But Admiral Mac Reynolds was already focused on the next challenge. Long-range sensors were detecting the approach of the Andromedan fleet, and preliminary analysis suggested that the newcomers had technology and tactics that would make the darkness swarm look primitive by comparison. "Admiral," asked Captain Torres, "what do we do if the Andromedans demand that we join their empire?" Mac Reynolds looked at the tactical display showing her battered but victorious fleet. Then, at the galactic map, where 46 species were preparing for the next phase of a war they had never wanted to fight. "Captain, the galaxy asked us to be their soldiers. That means we fight for the galaxy, not for an empire that thinks it owns the universe." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Besides, I'm curious to see what happens when humans who learn to fight by cooperation meet humans who learn to fight by conquest. You think we can defeat them?" Mac Reynolds smiled, and it was the same expression she had worn before every impossible victory in her career. "Captain, they're about to learn why the local branch of humanity survived on a planet that was trying to kill them for millions of years. They developed unity through conquest. We developed cooperation through necessity. Which approach do you think is stronger?" "We're about to find out," Mac Reynolds replied. "But I like our odds. After all, we just defeated an enemy that was specifically designed to fight humans. Now we get to fight humans who have never encountered anything like us." The war was far from over. But humanity had proven something important to both the galaxy and themselves. When faced with impossible odds and existential threats, humans didn't just survive. They found ways to turn their disadvantages into victory conditions. Soon, the Andromedans would learn what the Darkness Swarm had discovered too late, that humans were most dangerous when they were protecting something they cared about. And this galaxy, with its diverse species and peaceful cooperation, had become something that humanity cared about very much indeed. The Andromedan fleet arrived exactly when predicted, emerging from hyperspace at the galactic edge in a formation so perfect it looked like a computer simulation. 10,000 vessels arranged in geometric patterns that demonstrated mathematical precision beyond anything the local galaxy had ever witnessed. Admiral Mac Reynolds watched their approach from the bridge of UES Indomitable, now serving as the flagship for the largest military force in galactic history. Representatives from all 47 species had contributed ships, personnel, and resources to what they were calling the Defense Coalition, though everyone understood that humanity would lead the actual fighting. "Sensor analysis, Commander Hayes?" Mac Reynolds asked. "The Andromedan fleet is impressive, Admiral," Hayes reported, his voice carefully neutral. "Individual vessels are 3 to 4 times larger than our heaviest ships. Technology appears to be several generations ahead of anything in our database. And they're broadcasting on frequencies that suggest they expect immediate surrender." Mac Reynolds studied the tactical display, noting how the Andromedan formation moved with mechanical perfection. No individual initiative, no tactical flexibility, just overwhelming force arranged according to mathematical principles. "What are they saying?" "Standard Imperial surrender demands, ma'am. They're identifying themselves as the Terran Empire of Andromeda and claiming rightful authority over all human populations in this galaxy." "Interesting choice of words," observed Ambassador Chun-Li, who had joined the command crew for the historic encounter. "They're not claiming authority over the galaxy itself, just over local humans. Maybe they're not planning to conquer everyone," suggested Captain Torres hopefully. Mac Reynolds shook her head. "Captain, empires don't travel between galaxies to make friends. They're probably planning to recruit local humans and treat everyone else as, what's the old word? Vassals." The communication system activated with an incoming transmission. The holographic display showed a human figure in elaborate military dress that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never actually fought in a war. The man was tall, perfectly groomed, and radiated the kind of confidence that came from never having encountered serious opposition. "I am Fleet Admiral Constantine Reyes of the Terran Empire," the figure announced. "I speak for His Imperial Majesty Augustus Wellington III, rightful ruler of all human territories. Local human forces will stand down and report for integration into Imperial command structure." Mac Reynolds stepped forward, her simple military uniform and combat-scarred appearance contrasting sharply with the Andromedan's pristine presentation. "Fleet Admiral Reyes, I am Admiral Sarah Mac Reynolds of the Human Defense Coalition. Welcome to the Milky Way." "Coalition?" Reyes' expression showed genuine confusion. "Admiral Mac Reynolds, you appear to be operating under the misapprehension that local human forces have independent authority. All human military assets belong to the Terran Empire by right of species unity." "Fleet Admiral, with respect, local human forces operate under the authority of the Galactic Council and serve the interests of 47 allied species. We're not available for Imperial integration." The silence that followed was profound. Reyes' expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching outrage. "Admiral, are you suggesting that humans in this galaxy serve alien interests above human unity?" Mac Reynolds smiled, and several species had learned to recognize that expression as extremely dangerous. "Fleet Admiral, I'm stating that humans in this galaxy serve the interests of peace, cooperation, and mutual defense. If those happen to align with human interests, that's a bonus." "That is..." Reyes paused, clearly struggling with concepts that had no place in his worldview. "That is treasonous to the human species." "Actually," Chun-Li interjected, "it's loyalty to our chosen family. These species trusted us to protect them when no one else could. That makes them ours to protect." The Andromedan fleet began moving into what was clearly an attack formation. Perfect geometric arrangements that demonstrated overwhelming firepower and technological superiority. It was exactly the kind of display that had probably convinced dozens of species to surrender without fighting. It was also exactly the wrong approach to use against humans who had spent their entire history fighting things that were bigger and stronger than they were. "Admiral Mac Reynolds," Reyes said formally, "you have 1 hour to reconsider your position. Imperial forces will not fire upon fellow humans without providing adequate opportunity for rational decision-making." "How generous," Mac Reynolds replied dryly. "Fleet Admiral, let me save us both some time. We're not joining your empire. We're not abandoning our allies. And we're not backing down. Then, you force us to demonstrate Imperial military superiority." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the indomitable intense silence. Outside, the Andromedan fleet continued its methodical approach, moving with the confidence of a force that had never encountered serious resistance. "All ships, this is Admiral Mac Reynolds," she announced on the coalition-wide channel. "Imperial forces are demanding surrender." Obviously, that's not going to happen. Across the coalition fleet, representatives of 47 species prepared for battle alongside their human allies. Draknari warriors checked their weapons. Zolonian tacticians calculated optimal engagement angles. Krethak engineers made final adjustments to jury-rigged weapons systems. The Andromedans have superior technology and overwhelming numbers, Mac Reynolds continued. They've probably conquered dozens of species using exactly this approach. But they've never fought anything like us. She paused, watching her tactical display as the coalition fleet moved into defensive positions. It was a collection of ships that shouldn't work together, crews that had learned to fight alongside beings they'd only recently met, and tactics that combined 47 different approaches to warfare. "They're expecting to fight humans," Mac Reynolds announced. "They're about to discover that we're not just humans anymore. We're something new." The battle began exactly 1 hour later, when the Andromedan fleet opened fire with weapons that made previous galactic military technology look primitive. Energy beams that could crack planets lanced through space toward the coalition fleet, and struck nothing but empty space. "All ships, execute Protocol Chaos," Mac Reynolds ordered. Protocol Chaos was the culmination of everything humanity had learned about fighting superior enemies. Instead of meeting the Andromedan fleet in traditional formation combat, the coalition forces scattered into seemingly random patterns that made targeting impossible. But it wasn't random. Each ship followed carefully calculated trajectories that appeared chaotic, but were actually precisely coordinated to create overlapping fields of fire and mutual support networks. The Andromedans, trained in Imperial warfare that relied on overwhelming force and formal battle lines, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stay in one place long enough to be properly targeted. Andromedan forces are adapting their formation, reported Commander Hayes. They're trying to compensate for our mobility advantage. Let them adapt, Mac Reynolds replied. Torres, signal all coalition forces. Execute the Wellington Gambit. The Wellington Gambit was named after the Andromedan Emperor, and it was designed to exploit the Empire's greatest weakness, their assumption that superior technology guaranteed victory. Coalition forces began broadcasting surrender signals while simultaneously launching every small craft they possessed toward the Andromedan fleet. To Imperial sensors, it looked like the coalition was abandoning ship in the face of superior firepower. The Andromedans, conditioned by countless easy victories, moved to capture the fleeing craft rather than destroying them. It was a civilized approach to warfare that demonstrated Imperial magnanimity toward defeated enemies. It was also a fatal mistake. The fleeing craft were actually assault shuttles crammed with human marines, Draknari shock troops, and enough improvised explosives to cripple capital ships from within. The coalition had turned the Andromedan tendency towards civilized warfare into a delivery mechanism for close-quarters combat specialists. Direct hits on 17 Imperial vessels, reported Hayes. Boarding actions in progress. The Andromedans are experiencing significant difficulties with close-quarters combat. That was diplomatic language for the fact that Imperial troops, trained for technological warfare, were completely unprepared to fight enemies who considered hand-to-hand combat a normal part of space battles. But the real surprise came when the Coalition fleet revealed its secret weapon. All ships, activate the Harmony Protocol, Mac Reynolds ordered. The Harmony Protocol was something that had never existed before in galactic history, a truly integrated multi-species military doctrine. Instead of human ships supported by alien vessels, or alien tactics modified for human use, it was something entirely new. Zolonian energy manipulation enhanced human kinetic weapons. Draknari armor plating protected Krethak precision instruments. Aquatic navigation specialists provided targeting data for species that had evolved in three-dimensional thinking. Empathic coordinators created battlefield awareness that no single species could achieve alone. The result was a military force that combined the strengths of 47 different species while compensating for each other's weaknesses. Admiral, reported Captain Torres, his voice filled with awe, the Andromedans are falling back. They're requesting negotiation. Mac Reynolds nodded. The Empire had encountered something they couldn't understand or counter, a military force based on cooperation rather than conquest. Open a channel to Fleet Admiral Reyes. The Andromedan commander appeared on screen, his perfect uniform now showing signs of strain. Behind him, damage control crews worked to repair systems that had been sabotaged by boarding parties using tactics no Imperial manual had ever anticipated. Admiral Mac Reynolds, Reyes said carefully. Imperial forces are prepared to discuss terms for coexistence. Fleet Admiral, we're not interested in terms. We're interested in understanding. Understanding. Mac Reynolds leaned forward. You traveled between galaxies to recruit humans for your empire. But you've discovered something you didn't expect. The humans in this galaxy aren't the same species that left Earth millions of years ago. She gestured to her bridge crew, where human officers worked alongside alien specialists in perfect coordination. We've evolved, Fleet Admiral. Not biologically, but culturally. We've learned that strength comes from diversity, that adaptation comes from cooperation, and that the best way to protect human interests is to protect everyone's interests. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. You're suggesting that local humans are no longer human? I'm suggesting that we're more human than your empire could ever be, Mac Reynolds replied. Because we've learned what humanity is really capable of when we stop fighting each other and start fighting for each other. The negotiations that followed took 3 weeks and resulted in what historians would later call the Andromeda Accords. The Terran Empire agreed to establish peaceful diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council, while local human forces agreed to share technological innovations with their Andromedan cousins. More importantly, the Empire agreed to accept refugees, including the former Darkness Swarm entities that had requested asylum. The Andromedans, it turned out, were far better at rehabilitation than they were at understanding cooperative warfare. As the Andromedan fleet departed for the long journey home, Admiral MacReynolds stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the stars that had become humanity's new frontier. "Admiral," asked Ambassador Chun-Li, "do you think they'll be back?" MacReynolds smiled. "Oh, they'll be back. But, next time, they'll come as allies rather than conquerors. They've learned something important." "What's that?" "That the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a species that conquers everything it encounters," MacReynolds replied. "It's a species that makes friends with everything it encounters. Because when you threaten one member of that family, you threaten them all." The galaxy had requested soldiers when it faced the Darkness Swarm. Humanity had provided warriors who were more effective than anyone imagined. But, in the process, they had become something new, not just human soldiers, but galactic defenders who fought for ideals that transcended species boundaries. The war was over, but the alliance that had won it would continue. 47 species had learned to fight together, and they had discovered that cooperation wasn't just more ethical than conquest, it was more effective. And somewhere in the vast space between galaxies, the Andromedan fleet carried that lesson home to an empire that was about to learn what local humans already knew: that the strongest warriors aren't the ones who fight alone, but the ones who fight for something bigger than themselves.